We're up to Halacha Bays on Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Bays. That would be 21b4. 21b4. Listen, because my father is not here, I just wanted to ask the two of you. Are you guys okay with my father every once in a while throwing in a comment or two? Because he asked me yesterday, and I told him.
I love it.
I think it's great.
I love it.
I look forward to it.
Right, great. Thank you. Okay.
You know what I loved yesterday also? In the Gemara, we learned about how you're not supposed to, with your father asking a kasha that maybe, that sarcastically, that was a great kasha. And then all of a sudden, your father asked a question. He said, Daddy, that wasn't such a great question. I said, oh my God. I thought it was great.
You picked up
and you know what?
I clutch kasha.
I'll tell you what else I love about it. Your father chefs so much nachas from you being the Maggid here. It's beautiful.
Okay, great guys. Thank you. I'm getting embarrassed now. So,
I didn't realize you didn't get that. I'm on 22A1.
Very good. We'll get to the bottom because we stopped yesterday because of I didn't want to start the Tumah and Tahara at the end of a shir.
So after that, I had to go back and I did a whole. It's terrific.
Right, exactly. So it's hard enough as it is. So
I know.
I better to start a shir with it than to end it. So talking about Tumah and Tahara, just to remind everybody about contamination and purity. Min HaTorah, biblically speaking, it works like this. We have an Av HaTumah, a dead body, a Tzav, a Tzava, a Sheretz, all of those guys, all the good guys. If they touch, whether it's Adam and Kalim, people or utensils or food, whatever they touch becomes a Rishon L'Tumah. Now, here's the thing. People and utensils, Adam the Kalim, that's it. They stop at a Rishon biblically. They cannot contaminate further down the line. Only food and drink could be, if they're touched by a first level, a Rishon, could become a Sheni for Chulin, a Shalishi for Teruma, and a Revi for Kachim. Okay, that is biblically speaking. Rabbinically speaking, they came along and said, when it comes to holy stuff, like in the Beis Hamikdash, if a first level, otherwise known as a derived tumah, or in the words of the Mishnah, a bivlad hatumah, a derived tumah, which biblically speaking can no longer contaminate a utensil, a keli, or a person, because people in Caleb stop at level 1. Nonetheless, in the Rabbanon, rabbinically speaking, when it comes to holy stuff, if they are touched by a first level, which means they become a second level, which doesn't exist biblically, rabbinically it does exist. Rabbinically, we say it does need to be purified and immersed in water, etc. Okay? Once you got that clear in your head, the Mishnah becomes quite simple. So here we go. Parashis, the parashis, otherwise known as the curtains. What are the curtains? Picture the second Beis Hamikdash between the Heichal and the Kodesh HaKadosh, between the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies, there were two curtains upon which the Kohen walked in between those two curtains on Yom Kippur to walk into the Beis Hamikdash. So those curtains, as well as there was a curtain covering the door by the Ulam, the antechamber leading from the Azara, from the courtyard, into the Heichal, into the sanctuary. So those are the curtains we're talking about. Obviously, those curtains are holy and have a din of a keli, are considered utensils because a utensil is not simply what we think of a vessel, a breakfast bowl. It's anything that is carryable. Anything metaltalin is considered a utensil. The paroichis is a utensil. So, paroichis, okay, which means the curtains. Shenitmas bevelad hatoma, which became contaminated through a derived tuma, meaning it was touched by a rishon l'tuma. So a rishon touched the curtains. Mina Torah, they are not tamei, because kalim stop as a rishon. So they are incapable of being touched by a rishon and becoming a sheni. But rabbinically, yes, they are. And therefore, rabbinically, matfilan oisem b'fnim, you would immerse them in the mikvah inside the Beis Hamikdash's Hazara in the temple courtyard. And that makes sense because biblically they're not contaminated. Because if biblically they were contaminated, they would have to be removed completely from the temple, from the Beis Hamikdash. But because rabbinically they're still tar, and it's only and biblically they're still tar, and it's only rabbinically that they are now tamei, so you can immerse them in the mikvah within the environs of the Azara of the Beis Hamikdash. Umachnisin oisei miyad, and if by some reason you immerse them outside the courtyard, you decide to immerse them outside the courtyard, you can bring it in right away. There's no din of harav shemesh. If you remember, when somebody gets tummy and they go to the mikvah, they're tar, but they can't begin anything with holiness until the evening arrives. Here, because it's only rabbinical in nature and not biblical in nature, there's no such thing as having to wait till the evening, even if it was outside and you immersed it outside. But nitna be avatoma, but if the curtains were touched by an avatoma, which means the curtains became a rishon l'toma, a first level tuma, first level tuma, they're perfectly capable of being on a biblical level, because Adam the Kalim, people and utensils, become tamei up to a level 1. And a level 1 gets to a level 1 by being touched by an avatoma. So if an avatoma, a sheretz, touches the paroiches, now we've got a different situation. That means that it has to be immediately taken out of the holy, and therefore matbilin oisa b'chutz. Obviously, it needs to be immersed in the mikveh outside the courtyards, because it's not allowed to be in the environs of the Beis Hamikdash. The shochten oisa b'chel, and then you would spread it out in the chel. The chel is right outside the courtyards. Because even after you immerse it, you can't bring it in right away back into the courtyard, because it requires Harav Shemesh, because now it's a first level tumah. You go ahead and you immerse it, but like anybody who toivels, when they have a biblical contamination, after you toivel in the mikveh, you have to wait for the nighttime before you could activate the right to eat teruma or touch kachim. We're now on 21b5. But if it was a new paroiches, a brand new curtain, so now midorabanan, rabbinically speaking, there is a rule. Anything new needs to be toiveled when it comes to kodesh, which, by the way, is probably where we get our minhag, that when you get a new vessel, you're supposed to go ahead and toivel it in a mikvah, right? In the keli mikvah, in the vessel mikvah, right? This is probably where it's coming from. But if it was a new paroiches, because the halach is any new keli utensil that's being used in the Beis Hamikdash requires toiveling before its first use. We spread it out to dry on the roof of the portico, covering the benches on the Harabayis. If you remember, we had a Gemara in Masechtas Pesachim that there were a row of benches on the Harabayis known as the Itztaba. Why do we put it out over there? Kedei she'ira as malachtan shu'unoy, so that people should see its handiwork, for it's beautiful. In other words, because it's high up, everybody in Yerushalayim can see it spread out and go, wow, I see where our money is going. The money that we donated to the general fund, to the Shekalim, to the Taklin Chadatin, right? We see where our money is going. From here, we learn a very important fundraising reality. It's not enough to collect money. You got to show off what you did with the money and then make a very clear announcement. This is where your money went to. Your money went to Zeh Keli Van Veyu. This is my God, and I will beautify him. But in beautify him publicly. This is one of the great rules of fundraising, right? Marketing is everything. Marketing is everything. Chazal knew that, and so Chazal said, put your new paraychas, spread it out on the portico so that everybody could see it, and everybody go, whoa, very nice. That's where our money is going. Okay, so again, marketing is everything. It shouldn't be thought of, that's a way of sort of faking people out. No, marketing is extraordinarily important. People are people. When Shlomo HaMelech said nothing changes under the sun, he meant people don't change. Further, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Rav Shimon ben Hasagan, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel said, in the name of Rav Shimon, the son of the Sagan Kohen Gadol, the vice Kohen Gadol, Paroiches of your tefach. The thickness of the paroiches was a tefach. Look at your fist, and you can see how wide, how thick the curtain was. Al shivim v'shtayim nimim negeres. It was woven on 72 heedle shafts. Picture the picture of the way they used to, the wharf and the heddle. They used, in other words, the entire machine. Al kol nema b'nema eser b'arboyim chutin. And each thread had 24 strands. Arka aboyim amma. Its length was 40 amas, v'rachba 20, and its width was 20 amas, because that was the length and the width of the Beis Hamikdash. So side the paroiches in front of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and side the paroiches in front of the Ulam would require to be that big. Ushemoinim ishtayim raboy hoisenasis. And it was made from the expenditures of 820,000 gold dinars. There's many different explanations. Another explanation of this is that it was made by 82 young girls who did not yet have their period, and therefore would not contaminate the curtain. But the simple pshat is 820,000 gold dinars. Ushtayim oisem b'chol shana. And 2 were made every year, whether it's the 2 curtains in front of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or whether it was one of those curtains and the curtain by the Ulam. They were made every year. And 300 kahanim would be used to immerse it in the mikveh. And the Gemara is going to talk about this number 300, and I have something to say about this number 300. So we'll get to it in the Gemara. Sometimes the Gemara says if the Torah had gone out of its way by the paroiches to say the word chut, thread, achad, I would say it's one thread of one strand. Kafel, if it had said kafel folded, l'shnayim, I would have had 2 strands. Shazor, l'shloisha. If it said twisted, I would have had 3 strands. The fact is, what does it say? Mozar. Mozar, that's the pasuk, that's the lesson in the Torah. Mozar, l'shisha, which means a double of shazor. So that means we now have 6. And since arba, there are 4 types of colors in turquoise, purple, scarlet, and linen. So you see the color purple, which was always a kingly color. Interesting to note that the Chinese vermilion, the Chinese emperors for thousands of years, only they were allowed to write with the color vermilion, with the color purple. And only they could wear purple because purple somehow, in the world at large, purple was associated with Malchus. And now we see where it actually came from. Because the Kodesh HaKadoshim's curtains were essentially curtains of various colors of purple. So we've got 6 strands because of Mozart times 4 equals Mikan Ha Esim Ba'abah. From here we've got 24 strands. Tani, we learned Shloshim V'Shtayim. Others say that the strands actually had 32 strands. And now we're on 21b6. Ilu hayachot echad kafel l'shnayim shazur li'arba, because that's double of kafel. Moshe l'shmayna. So therefore, Moshe, which is double of shazur, would be 8. And arba, we have the 4 colors: turquoise, purple, scarlet, and linen. Therefore, 8 times 4, mikana to lost in the train, 32 strands. Says the Gemara Tana, another price, it says Abba Shmaina, 48. And it learns up like this. Now they add an extra word. Kalia braided l'shlalash. L'shlash shizor, which is double kalia, l'shisha is 6. Mavzar, you double up 6, l'shmainas, l'shneimas to 12. 12 times 4, arba, the turquoise, the purple, the scarlet, and the linen. So 12 times 4, mikano, arba, v'tamanga, comes out to 48. Why do I care? Number one, we care because it's our Kodesh HaKadoshim, and we want to talk how beautiful it is. Second of all, if you all remember the Haggadah, we have a similar argument. How many markets were on? How many markets there were, right? So we're always looking to get to the bigger number, the better. Says further, cost of Echad Oina, my Sirai came in one pasuk regarding the curtains, separating the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Heichel from the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It says the work of a Roikein, which is an embroiderer. Because of Echad Oina, my Sirai, and another pasuk says the work of a designer. What's the difference between a designer and an embroiderer? My Sirai came, an embroiderer. Parts of Echad has only one face. A designer has 2 faces. What are we talking about? Rabbi Yehuda Meram Nechemia. Came the work of an embroiderer. Ari Mikan b'Cholot Mikan. A lion on one side and it was blank on the other side. The work of a designer. Ari Mikan, Ari Mikan, a lion on this side and a lion on this side. And the Charonoma, but the other one says, Ma'isaraikim, Ari Mikan, Ari Mikan, a lion on this side, a lion on that side. Ma'isaraikim, the work of a designer. Ari Mikan, Benesher Mikan, a lion on one side and an eagle on the other side. And now you know why that on the Aron HaKodesh, on the holy arks of our Yeshuls, what do we put? We always put lions. We always have lions on the top or whatever it is. It's part of the design of most Aron HaKodesh. Certainly the older Aron HaKodesh all had lions on the top. And if you look carefully at the cover of your Gemara from Art Scroll, if you turn back, you will see that there are 2 lions sitting on top of the design, embossed on the cover, right on top. And now you see this is where it comes from. Okay? The roar of the lion. Now we go like this. And they made it with 820,000 gold things, and 300 kahanim would be used to immerse it. Rav Yitzchak ben Bizna b'shem Shmuel Guzma. The number 300 is an exaggeration. It just means a lot. Tana Taminon, and we learned elsewhere regarding the Trumas Hadeshen, the ash that obviously was piled up on top of the Mizbeach, on top of the altar, which ultimately, of course, is cleaned up. Ta'amim, says the Gemara, the Mishnah, Hayalel Kishloisha Meyas Core, 21B7. At times it piled up 300 core of ashes on it. Rabbi Yossi Barabun B'Shem Shmuel, Guzma, it's an exaggeration. So I want to talk about the number 300. Actually, I want to talk about the number 3, because this is as good a time as any. There are certain numbers that are always cognitive. The number 400 is a huge number in Jewish history. Avram Avinu bought the Maris HaMachpelah for Arba Meir Zuz, 400 Zuz. Yaakov Avinu, Esav was coming in front of him with 400 men. There were 400. How long would the Shibud from the priesthood of Asarim till Yetzias Mitzrayim? 400 years. How long was it from Moshe Rabbeinu to David HaMelech? 400 years. How long did the first base of English stand? About 400 years. How long did the second base of English stand? 400 years. How long did it take for the Gemara to be sealed after the Churban Bayesheni? 400 years. The Rishonim stood for 400 years until the Inquisition. The Achrayim stood for 400 years until the Holocaust. The number 400 has a lot of connotation in Jewish history. The number 300 is always used as a guzma, but it's not just the number 300, it's also the number 3. And to give an example, we all learned, we all know the famous medrash that Rebecca, was 3 years old when she married Yitzchak. And everybody says Yitzchak was 40 and she was 3. 3 is a guzma. Even 3 has to be understood that compared to 40, she was 3. Obviously, things in the world were different then. Girls got married much, much younger. By 12 and a half, if she wasn't married, she was considered an old maid. Okay, we know that, the Bugrove, that's the idea. So girls were married off much younger because it was a much more dangerous world in reality. Girls, from the time they were 3 years old, were very, very vulnerable. So the number 3 is used. This needs to be remembered about the number 3 as being somewhat of a guzma and explanation, because there are going to be some very difficult Gemaras that are going to come up while we're going through Shas. When it talks about a girl that is raped below the age of 3 and be above the age of 3, and the Gemara talks about it purely from a pure legalistic point of view. Okay? A pure legalistic point of view. Not from a moral point of view, or even from a non-legalistic punishment point of view, of which there was, of course. But when you get to those Gemaras, when you learn the Gemaras from our understanding in the 20th and 21st century, it's very difficult to understand maybe not so much legally, but certainly morally, until you understand that that's deliberate to number 3 and how it's used in the Gemara in its explanation. So I just wanted to bring this here now, even though we haven't banged into such Gemaras, but because we will, it's kedai to keep that in the back of our mind so that when we do Amir Hashem, we don't jump out of our hats. Let's put it that way.
What are you saying? We learn it in Sanhedrin?
You did, right, you did. And I'm sure Yaakov spent a lot of time on it.
We did, and it was very disconcerting to people who were in the Shia.
Right, and you have to learn that up you have to understand something about Chazal. We had no prison system. The Torah Kedosh has no prison system. So we all know the halacha, and you learned it in Sanhedrin, that if a guy is chasing another guy with a knife and they run into a building and the guy comes out with a bloody knife and you go inside and you see the guy stabbed, you can't kill the guy. Why can't you kill the guy? Because there were no witnesses, there was no warning, no nothing. So we see in pure law, what happens to the guy? He goes free. In reality, that's not what happened. They threw him into a building with no roof, and they left him there. And they let HaKadosh Baruch Hu deal with him accordingly. We're not killing him, we're just throwing him into a building. In other words, people didn't get away with bad behavior. It's just that I couldn't give you the punishment as stated in the Torah. So we came up with a way around the problem that, quote unquote, our hands are clean. God's going to do what he wants to do. So in other words, we created a jail system without calling it a jail. Because there's two parts to halacha. If you remember the famous, when Yosef Tzaddik said to his brothers, Ani Yosef, ha'oid havinu chai. I am Joseph, is my father still alive? Like they couldn't look themselves in the face. And Rashi says, Oy lonu liyoim adin, oy lonu liyoim ha'toichacha. Oy to us the day of judgment, oy to us the day of teichacha, of admonition, which means there is the law, and then there's the other side, the moral side of it. Your thinking, your thought process that went into it, your justification, how you twisted and turned yourself into a pretzel to justify what you did until you woken up and you realize your arguments are no good. In law, there are two things going on. There is the law, and after the law, and you learn this in Sanhedrin too, when Bezdin says Chayiv Misa, then after they paskin, they say we're giving him the death penalty, then they start calling out, does anybody have any reason why we can't put this guy to death? What are you talking about? You just said Chayiv Misa. That's not the way a court works. That's the law. Now we have a separate section of law that may not exactly be codified, but is built into the system, the moral side of it. There is the cold legal reality. That's because law is blind. It's cold, it's legal. Okay? For an example, Pirivia, having children. The mitzvah is on us guys. Logically, that don't make any sense. They got to carry it for the women got to carry it for 9 months. Legally, we're doing the action, and they are the mikabel. They are accepting. That is why in homosexuality, it's only men that have the issue of homosexuality. Women, lesbianism, while the Gemara says it's disgusting, is not also in a Torah, because no action is actually taking place. It's the same logic. It doesn't make sense if you look at it a little till you realize law must have a theory. Law is a theory-based idea. And that theory-based idea is where there's an action, the one who does the action, it's on him. In this case, Pirivia, having children, you're doing the action. So even though she's carrying and she's the Akaris Abayis, and all her life she's worrying about the children a lot more than we guys do, nonetheless, that's a separate issue. Same thing in all aspects of law. When you get to those Gemaras that are hard, like with regard to the girls at 3, less than 3, 1, first there is the cold, hard fact of the law. Gemara there is something clearly before the Churban Bayis and after the Churban Bayis. And this is how you know that evolution, that the Chazal took evolution as a given. One of the ways. It is clear that people's internal operation changed. I will give you guys a perfect example since we're only a bunch of guys on this thing. And I know we're getting bogged down and we got to finish the Masechta, so we'll move. But the Gemara, clearly Chazal used to do autopsies because they knew everything that was going on in the body. As we're going to find in many places in Shas, they clearly felt that there was one pipe for urine, for going to the bathroom, and there was another pipe for semen. The Gemara says it straight up, there are 2 pipes. We know today that there's only one pipe. There's only one pipe in the body. And the Rishonim talk about it. And they said, things changed. That's without even blinking an eye. After the Churban Bayis, we Jews and the world at large changed. Everything was tied to the base of English. Things change. We got smaller as a people. We got everything changed. Just like the Gemara says, people who live in a cold environment, their bones get larger. People who live in the desert, their feet get wider, right? Etc. etc. So, anyways, in all this, here we are. Let's go further because we could talk about this for a day and a half, and instead, let's go finish the Masechta. Halacha 3. Here we go. Basa b'sar kodesh kadoshim shenitcha. Meat of kodesh kadoshim. Chatas, an oila, became tomei. Bein ba'avatumah, bein b'veladatumah, whether through an avatumah or a derived tumah, i.e., whether biblically or rabbinically, bein b'pnim, bein b'chutz, whether the tumah took place inside or outside the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, Beis Shammai Yomi Makol Yisrael b'pnim. In all cases, the contaminated meat, because it's kodesh kadoshim, should be burned inside the courtyard, chutz, except mishenitla ba'ava tumah michutz, except for something that became tumah by being touched by an ava tumah, and it got touched by an ava tumah outside the courtyard. Since it got touched by an ava tumah outside the courtyard, and therefore is biblically tumah, therefore, of course, you can't bring it back into the courtyard. You got to get rid of it. It's only if it was in the courtyard and it got tamei by an avatuma, then don't move it, burn it immediately. Beis Hillel says just the opposite. Hakol yisrael b'chutz. Everything should be burnt outside. If it gets tamei, pull it out, get it out fast as you can, and burn it outside. Chutz mishetimah b'velada tumah b'fnim. Except for something a kodesh basa kodesh kadoshim that was touched by a derived tumah by a rishon, which biblically means that the meat itself is not tamei, it's actually tor on a biblical level. It's only tamei on a rabbinical level. And since it could really remain inside the courtyard, let it remain inside the courtyard and burn it. We're now on today's daf. Rabbi Eliezer says, no. If it becomes tamei with being touched by an avatumah, that means biblically tamei. Burn it outside. It's biblically tamei. Get it out of the courtyard as fast as you can. If it only became tamei through a rishon, so biblically it's not tamei. It's only tamei on a rabbinical level. Just burn it on the inside because there's really no problem. So then it's only rabbinical. Burn it on the inside. Rabbi Kiva, no, simple. The makim mitumasa is shab. Wherever it became tamei, whether biblically or rabbinically, burn it over there. Got tamei outside, burn it outside. Got tamei inside, burn it inside. Says the Gemara, our Mishnah says that something avatuma is obviously a tumah biblically. Vlad atuma midivreihem. And the vlad atuma is only rabbinical. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no. Bein zed, devar Torah. Both of these are a devar Torah. Because Rabbi Yochanan holds that even when something is touched by a derived tumah, it becomes rabbinical in nature. Right? This because, which is a rishon, the meat becomes biblically tummy as a sheni. He holds, he said, the reality is this is kachim. Since meat, food could become tamei to a sheni as a chulin, to a shlishi as a truma, and revi by kachim, says Rabbi Yosef, what's the problem? This is even a derived tumah and it touched the meat. It should become a rabbinical tumah all the way down to a revi. I hold that kachim becomes tamei even to a revi on a biblical level. Says the Gemara, Kasha de Rabbi Yochanan al Beis Shammai, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that it's all biblical. We've got a problem then with Beis Shammai. The Beis Shammai Yomer Makol Yisod B'Fnim. Everything is burnt inside the courtyard chutz, except Mishenitla ba'avatumah mechutz, something that becomes tummy outside by being touched by an avatumah, which makes it a biblical avatumah. So pray to Gemara, ma bein avatumah b'chutz, ma bein veladatumah b'chutz. According to Rabbi Yochanan, both of them are biblical. So then what's the difference? According to Beis Shammai, what's the difference? That if it was touched by an abatuma, that remains outside. But anything else touched, it gets burnt inside. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, they're all biblical in nature, so they should all be burnt outside. What's going on over here? Says the Gemara. And isn't there a problem if you go according to Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel amakol yisrael bechutz, bechutz mashitim belad b'fnim, except for the thing that's the belad atuma that was the matama through touched by a rishon, and it's inside. Since we argued that according to Beis Hillel, biblically it's still good, that's why it can remain inside. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, bein belad atuma b'fnim, bein arab atuma b'fnim, according to Rabbi Yochanan, they're all biblical in nature. So how can anything remain inside? So the Gemara puts aside Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, leaves it aside, and now looks at Bar Kapara, which says abatuma is divrei Torah, belad atuma is only midrabanan. So now we go lo yavi midrabanan ela de Bar Kapara. Discussing, they only analyzed the Mishnah with regard to Bar Kapara, that abatuma is biblical, velad atuma is rabbinical. The kash the Bar Kapara al Beis Shammai, and then when they started saying, wait a minute, Bar Kapara is problematic with regard to Beis Shammai. The Beis Shammai yoimrim akol yisrael b'fnim chutz minit shnitl ba'abatuma b'chutz. Rabbi Beis Shammai says everything is burnt in the inside. We're on 22a2. 22a2, everything is burned inside the courtyard, except for an abatuma outside the courtyard. Since it's biblical in nature, don't bring it back in. Break the Gemara by made abatuma ben chutz ben bechutz ben bifnim. Aren't they all biblical? So what's the difference? How could you make a split? So it says the Gemara, Beis Shammai needs to be explained. Begin the Rabbi Akiva. Like Rabbi Akiva said, Malkum to Masa Shomteim Seirafa. The place it became Tommy is the place where it's burned. Following this principle, Beis Shammai rules that the basa of Kachin, which was metama by an abatuma outside the courtyard, is not allowed to be burnt inside. Now we go the other way. Don't we have a problem now with Bar Kapara in the words of Beis Hillel? To Beis Hillel Omar Akol Yisrael b'chutz chutz mishenima b'velad atuma b'fnim. And Beis Hillel says that all cases should be burned inside, except for the case where something became tamei with a derived tuma. I mean, it should be burned outside, except for a velad atuma that's got tamei inside the courtyard. You might as well leave it inside the courtyard because biblically it's not tamei. But that's not true according to Rabbi Yochanan. Bein velad, bein velad atuma, bein b'fnim, bein b'chutz. Aren't they all rabbinic according to Bar Kapara? So therefore, everything should be burnt inside the courtyard, except for an abat, something that was touched by an abatuma b'chutz. So it says the Gemara begin to Rav Shimon Amar. You have to explain Beis Hillel according to the words of Rav Shimon. The food and drink of a Mitzayra are banished from all three camps, from Machnas Kedusha, Machnas Leviah, Machnas Yisrael, all the way out. So even if it's a rabbinical in nature, nonetheless, we want you to go ahead and burn it. So if it became tamei outside the courtyard, just from a velad atuma derived tuma, which is only rabbinical in nature, nonetheless keep it outside, because you see in the case of a mitzayra that we're asking him to be all the way out. So we're trying to be extraordinarily careful. So if it becomes tamei, even with the derived rabbinical tamei, if it's outside already, let it remain outside. Very good. We are now up to the last Mishnah in Masechta Shekalim. The last Mishnah in Masechta Shekalim. It says the halacha dalet. Ivrei hatomid nitoyin ma'ichatzi kevesh lamata b'marov. The limbs of the Tomid, that means overnight you prepare the limbs to be brought up in the morning, were placed on the lower half of the ramp on the western side. on the western side of the ramp, the big ramp leading up to the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the outside altar in the courtyard. The limbs of the Talmud were brought there to be ready for the next day. Shel Musafim, like today, Rosh Chodesh, we bring Musafs. Mit the Mechatzi Keves Lamata b'Mizrach. The limbs of the Musaf were placed on the lower half of the ramp on the east side. And Shel Rosh Chodoshim, and the ones of the Chodoshim, the first one, the first Musafim were the limbs of the Musaf of the Shabbos and the Yom Tovim. On Shabbos, we bring Musaf. And Rosh Chodesh, Nitan al Karkoi v'Mizbeach Milamalo. And the limbs of the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh were placed on the Karkov of the altar, which, if you remember, was the little walkway between the ramp and the actual top of the altar of the Mizbeach. Hashkolim v'abikurim einin nahagin el b'pnei habayis. The mitzvah of shkolim and bikurim, bringing the first new growths of the year, bringing the first new growths of the year, are no longer only brought when the Beis Hamikdash is Kayim. Bikurim, because the pasuk says, Reishis Bikurei ad Moscha, the choicest of your first fruits, Tavi Beis Hashem Elokecha, you shall bring to the house of Hashem. So only when I have the house of Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash, is Bikurim around. Shkolim, because the whole Shkolim were used for the kabbanis and the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash. Avo Meiser Dagon, but grain types, that means Trumas Meiser, is Meiser Behema, and the Meiser of Behema, that means when you have the new behemoths, you run them to a chute, and every 10th of the new behemoths are holy, Ubechayris, and the firstborns, it doesn't matter whether the Beis Hamikdash is in existence or not. Why? Because these are not tied to the Beis Hamikdash, they're tied to the land. And the land is always holy because of the rule, Kedusha Rishayna, Kedusha Lishata, Kedusha Liyasid Lava. The Kedusha was always in existence from the moment that the land was created. Which explains why the Rambam writes with regard to Yitzchak, the Migdash Nekad Yitzchak. In the Migdash, Yitzchak was brought up on the Akedah. Now, what is that all about? The Beis Hamikdash wasn't built for another 900 years. The answer is the Kedusha of the place is not tied to the binyan, it's tied to the place. Paskins the Chassam Soifa, that except for the fact that the Arabs will kill us, that's what he writes, because the Yishmaelim do not allow us, we would bring the Korban Pesach today because of Tumah Chutzah B'Tzibur. And because you don't need the binyan, you need the place. So, says the Mishnah Vayta, Hamagdi Shekalim Ubikurim, if somebody makes a mistake, and he does today, and he designates Shekalim, or his new growing fruit as Bikurim, when there is no Beis Hamikdash, Hareze Kodesh becomes Kodesh, and you got to get rid of it by throwing it into the Yam HaMelech, into the Dead Sea. 22a4. Rabbi Shimon Oimeh Ha'oimeh Bikurim Kodesh. If one says Bikurim are holy today, when there is no Beis Hamikdash, Einoi Kodesh, it does not become holy, because, says Rabbi Shimon, Bikurim are connected directly in the Torah to the Beis Hamikdash, where it says, Reishis Bikurei Ad Mascha, the choices of your first growths, Tavi Beis Hashem Elokecha, bring it to the house of Hashem. Where there is a house of Hashem, it's possible to make them holy. Where there is no house of Hashem, you cannot make them holy. Okay, says the Gemara. But by the way, from Rav Shimon, clearly it seems that Shkolim could, yes, become holy, because he only mentions that Bikurim cannot become holy. Obviously, the Gemara is going to have to jump on that, and that tomorrow is what you guys are going to be Messiah, the Masechta on. Exactly. on this exact point. You see it now in the Mishnah. So tomorrow, when you're being Messiah, you should start with this line in the Mishnah. Rab Shimon Bikurei Kodesh Einai Kodesh, because of the pasuk, and you can see the pasuk in number 18, the page before 22:8:3, number 18, the bottom of the left-hand corner. It says, "Reishis Bikurei Ad Mascha Tavi Beis Hashem Elokecha." Okay, that the first choices should be brought to the house of Hashem. My definition says, Rav Shimon, where there's no house of Hashem, what it calls there's no Bikurim. What about the Shekalim? Which seems to say that even today, if you make them holy, they remain holy. We'll get to that in a second. Says the Gemara, Ezu Karkuv HaMizbeach. What do we mean by the Karkuv of the Mizbeach? Amav and Keren LeKeren. It means an Amma wide strip between one corner of the upper part of the altar, and the next one, Makom Hilach Ragle Kahanim, the area where the Kahanim would walk around when doing things on the top of the altar, when offering things up on the top of the altar. Mufsei Shabbos, Mufsei Rosh Chodesh. What happens if today, like today, it's Rosh Chodesh, but it's also Shabbos? Which one takes precedence? Which Musaf goes up first? The Shabbos Musaf or the Rosh Chodesh? Rabbi Yomi is Sabbath. Rabbi Yomi thought to say Mosif Shabbos and Mosif Rosh Chodesh, Mufsei Rosh Chodesh Kaidmin. The Musaf of Rosh Chodesh goes first. Break the Gemara right away. Chala Rabbi Yomi ben Hadam. Rabbi Yomi brings his proof from here. Shiroi shel Shabbos v'shiroi shel Rosh Chodesh. The Levim who's saying both the shir of Shabbos, Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos, and the shir of Rosh Chodesh. Shiru shel Rosh Chodesh Kaidmin. The shir of Rosh Chodesh took precedence. So just like the song of Rosh Chodesh took precedence, so the Muslims should take precedence. But Rabbi Yossi, no. Sheniu Tama. There's a complete difference. The Amar of Chibishem Rabbi Yochanan regarding that the song of Rosh Chodesh takes precedence, Kedei lefars moiloi diashu Rosh Chodesh, because that was the way that they were mefarsim. They made it known. They announced that today is Rosh Chodesh, and everybody around pay attention. We're bringing the Rosh Chodesh kabbalas. Viram, but here Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. Here we have a case of two musafin of Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh. Mufsei Shabbos Kaidman, the Musaf of Shabbos must take precedence. Al Shem, because we have a rule called Tadir Mechaverei Kaidim Eschaverei. Tadir V'Sheinai Tadir Tadir Kaidman. Something that's frequent and not so frequent. The thing that's frequent comes first. So because of this, since Shabbos shows up every week and Rosh Chodesh is once a month, the Musaf and Shabbos comes before the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. The Shira is first of Rosh Chodesh because we want to announce and we want to make it clear that today's Rosh Chodesh comes before the Shira of Shabbos. So what do? I said, what did the one do? Shaykhed Mavsei Shabbos. One slaughtered the Musaf of Shabbos. Va'aymer Aleim Shiru Shel Rosh Chodesh. And you recited the song of Rosh Chodesh. And when you brought the Musafim of Rosh Chodesh, you sang the song of Shabbos. Mizmor Shir Yom Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Shekalim u'Bikurim. If one designated Shekalim or Bikurim, when the Beis Hamikdash is not standing, Rav Shimon says that the Bikurim do not become Kodesh. The Bikurim do not become Kodesh. Says the Gemara, Hashkalim Kachu. But the coins, according to Rav Shimon, apparently do become Kodesh. Okay? Says the Gemara, we're now on 22a5. 22a5 says like this: Rav Shimon ben Yehuda mishum Rav Shimon vein elu loy kachu. That in fact both the Bikurim and the Shekalim, according to Rav Shimon, do not become Kodesh today when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, ger bisman hazeh, a ger who becomes a convert, who becomes today a convert when the Beis Hamikdash is standing. So now today we know for somebody to become a convert, he has to table in the mikvah, get a bris milah, and make a bracha. But
where are you?
Hi, Daddy. We're up to Chabez on the Aleph on the bottom. 22a5. 22a5.
22a5.
Okay, 22a5.
Right,
So
I got it.
you got it left hand column. Left hand column. Tony, Ger Bisman Hazeh, a convert today, which again, today he titles in the mikvah, gets a bris milah, makes a bracha. But in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, he also needed to bring a carbon. He also needed to bring a sacrifice. And part of the conversion thing was with his first sacrifice, they would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice onto the convert. And with that, his conversion would be completed. Obviously, today, that is not in play. Okay? So now, Tani Gerbis Manazeh, Sarach Lehevi Kinoi Revius Kesef. He has to set aside a quarter of a silver dinar for his kingdom, for his bird pair, the oila and the chatas that he requires to bring in order to do his conversion. And because Mashiach might show up, and when he does, he's going to owe these kabbanis on having become a convert. Rabbi Shimon, no. Pitler Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'nei hatakolo. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai annulled this obligation because of the stumbling block that it created. Ma'u b'nei hatakolo. What's the stumbling block? Bahadi detoni, like the Bryce explains. Ein madishin v'loi ma'arichin v'loi machrinin b'zman hazeh. We do not make things holy today. We don't make erech vows. That means on the value of people that the Torah puts individual values up from 0 to 5, 5 to 20, 20 to 60. Nor do we make a cherem nowadays, which means like a neder to give certain money when the basic condition is not standing.
Okay, so if everything's working fine, there it is.
Im higdish, oy herich, oy cherim. But if one did make something holy, or make an erech vow, or make a cherem, today he blew it. He got a moment of holiness, and he decided to make things kodesh. Akasus yisoref. If what he made holy was an article of clothing, it should be burned. Habe'emot the oker, and an animal should be uprooted. What does uprooted mean? That means you put it out to pass. You put it out. And you just leave it alone in the same way that you stick a person in a prison and you just leave him alone and whatever happens, happens. Same thing with the animal. You put him in a pen and that's it, and you abandon him, and whatever happens, happens. Says the Gemara, you put him in the pen, you lock the door, and then he dies on his own accord.
Where are you? I lost you again.
22A5, right column. 22A5, right column. Ketzad Noel Panel, unless you lock the door, and the animal dies on its own. And today, the money that you consecrated goes to Yamamelech. So, Charlie, to go back to our previous conversation, similar to the guy who stabs a guy in a building and there are no witnesses and there were no warning, so you can't give him the death penalty. So what did they do? They threw him into a building with no roof and they locked the door. And then they said, no, whatever happens, happens. Can't worry about it. Similar, same idea. Once you see it close to halacha. When you're backed into a corner and you don't know what to do at this point in time, because the person was not supposed to consecrate his animal today when the base of this is not kayin, and he does. So now what are we going to do with this animal? It's consecrated. It's holy, according to this Meraisa. You have no choices but to throw it essentially to Hashem, and you take your hands completely off. Now, Ova B'Kiddush, what happens if a ger, a convert, transgresses on Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's ruling and designates money for his kinim, for his bird and oila, for his chatas and oila bird offering? So he says Mashiach is going to apal that I believe in the coming of Mashiach. Every day is going to come. So tomorrow, when he comes, I, the newly minted convert, will have the money put aside to bring my kinem. Right? So what do we do? Man Madi Amir Rab Shimon, can we refer from the answer of Rab Shimon? Bittul Rabbanim Yochanan ben Zakkai, Teatakola. That Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai nullified the obligation because it's Takoma. That means Bezdin with its power can say, I'm sorry, it's nullified. Okay, 22A6. 22A6. Hada Amra Ava Bekidish Kitchu. This applies that if one transgresses Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's ruling and does designate money, the Gagra does designate money because he said Mashiach is coming tomorrow. Today, he is indeed, it's consecrated, and the money has to literally be put in the side, and that's it. And from generation to generation, but Mashiach will come and he'll have to use it. Says the Gemara, is that right? Rabbi Yehuda Amtudario, Rabbi Yehuda from Amtudario, Boy Kamei Rabbi Yossi asked of Rabbi Yossi, in the case of money designated by the ger, by the convert, for his kinim, for his chatas and oilo, do you say, Reb Shimon? And now we're on 22b. 22b. Chav Beis Amid Beis. Ama Kidshoy, do you say that the money is consecrated, is holy? But in the case of the shekel, you said that Rab Shimon holds that it's not. The Mishnah says, not the Mishnah, the Baraisa said that according to Rab Shimon, it's not holy. Amalei, so we've got a contradiction according to Rabbi Yossi and what Rab Shimon says. Amalei, Tama L'chach Ein Magdish L'chatchila. In the case of Shekalim, L'chatchila, in the first place, you should not be designating any money today for Shekalim. Because number one, when the new year begins, you need to bring from what? New, you need to bring the offerings from new Shekalim, from Taklin Chadatin. And this money therefore becomes old. And this shekel will be old. So therefore the Chazal say, in fact, don't become consecrated to begin with. Now this, everybody, should be very, very hard to understand. We hold Ani Mami Be'emunah Shalema B'Bias HaMashiach Al Babi Sheyisma Mea Im Kozeh Achak Eloi V'Chol Yoim Sheyavai, that every day it's coming. So how can Chazal say the money is going to be old? Today I'm going to consecrate this money for Shekalim, and guess what? Mashiach's coming today. So guess what? It's not going to be old money. It's going to be new money. So, two things you can learn from here. Mashiach is coming. No question about it. But we don't run our lives that way. We believe Mashiach is coming every single day. No question about it. But that does not mean you shouldn't buy a house in Boca Raton. Because right now you're here. Right now you're here. When Mashiach comes, great. Every day. But there's also the fact, he's tired. He's taking this jolly good time. But we believe that today he's going to come. And there's no reason why not today. But you don't run your life that way. Those are two separate mindsets. That's why Chazal can say, don't lechatchila make your coins holy. Because when the new year begins, it becomes taklin chadatin. And we can't use it for last year's stuff. So even though we're in Chodesh Iyar, which is the beginning of the year, don't do it. Because in 11 months from now, it's going to get old. Mashiach's going to be here already, so it won't be old. That's not the way we run the show. Number two, you can make a lumdish argument. When Mashiach gets here, that's when the new year begins. You can argue, what is the new year? When I have a Beis HaMikdash, well, then Nisan is the new year. But if Mashiach would come today, it's Iyar. Today is Iyar. So what are we going to say? The new year is beginning when? In Iyar. So if I go ahead and and consecrate my coin today when Mashiach's not here, even if Mashiach is going to come this afternoon, that's a different time already. That's a new beginning. So there's two ways of looking at this. Number one, we don't run our lives. We don't run our lives, even though, of course, Mashiach will come any day and any moment, but we don't run our lives, our transactions that way. Number two, even if you want to say yes, you can argue, when does the new year begin? When Mashiach comes. Anyways, further. Okay, so now, but in this case, when money is designated by the ger, by the convert, for his birds, this money is old. What's that got to do with the birds? Regarding other forms of consecrated items and a ger's bird offerings, it's not tied to any age. You don't need new. You don't need a bird less than a year old. It could be a bird that's older than a year old. There's no time frame on the age of the bird. The higdish kadosh. So if he makes it holy, it becomes holy. So says the Gemara, in that case, one who designates a shekel today, let him leave it until the Beis Hamikdash is built. Exactly our question. So let's leave the shekel until the Beis Hamikdash is built, right? Because even an old shekel could be used for the walls of Yerushalayim and the streets of Yerushalayim and the upkeep of the wall. So, says the Gemara, Shema Yibana Beis Habayis Birishayna. Perhaps the Beis Hamikdash will be built on the 1st of Nisan, like it was originally. And the new collection will be made of the new Shekalim in its proper time on the 1st of Nisan, since at that time any Shekalim before that will be old, right, and therefore will become invalid. The Chazal said it's no good. But here in the case of the ger's money, what concern do we have? Whenever Mashiach gets here, that's when he'll bring his birds. And this is where we're stopping.